Okay, in terms of the stuff, deadlines are unchangified. So quizzes part 1 covering part 1, deadline September 22nd, end of day. Quizzes part 2 covering part 2, exam 1 covering part 1, October 20th, end of day. Exam 2, quizzes part 3, November 17th, end of day. Exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, December 8th, end of day. And exam 5, December 15th, noon, near the end of the normal final thing. In all the quizzes, you can do them as you wish, but just be sure to complete them before deadlines. For the paper, if you wish to do a draft, be sure to complete it before or by November 12th. You can do as many drafts as you wish, including 0 being no drafts, up to as many as you want to do until either you just get sick of the process and just say, no more drafts, or you get the grades you want, upload the final version to Blackboard, or time itself comes to an end on November 12th. +5 deadline, November 15th on Blackboard. Just upload it there, and as long as it's in by then, you get your base score +5. Emergency deadline in case things go wrong, November 22nd, and half credit in case things go really wrong, December 8th. Before pressing on to the new stuff, talking about argument basics, anything about the stuff that has been, or the stuff that shall be, that needs more stuff. Okay, so now we turn to argument basics. And we'll cover arguments for a couple of reasons. First, in regards to the paper, it's an argumentative paper, so you need to argue philosophically. And as I mentioned before, I make no assumptions that you've taken a philosophy class or written a philosophy paper, and so I include the basics, so that way if you've never done any of that stuff, you'll be able to do well on the paper. If you've seen this before, you can kind of cruise control at this point. If you've taken the logic class or critical thinking class, you've seen this in much greater detail because in those classes you spend an entire semester on arguments and reasoning, and we'll spend but a few brief moments. So most important for the paper in order to write it, but also when you look at the various philosophical positions, we'll know like what arguments are and have sort of a rough template about how to assess them. But for full argument experience, and this is the commercial part of our class, you'd want to take critical thinking or logic, which cover lots more stuff about arguments. Now, in normal everyday life, if someone texts you to say they got into an argument with their significant other, what would they mean? They had a disagreement. Disagreement, dispute, fight. Now, that's a perfectly fine use of argument, because most technical terms in academia also have normal usages. So in normal everyday life, when we say argument, we mean dispute, disagreement, fight, battle. But philosophically, it means something different. So what does it mean philosophically? Well, an argument is a set of claims. And a claim is any statement that is either true or false. And they can range from the very mundane, like this is a backpack, to the very controversial and complicated, like DACA should be discontinued, or DACA should be retained. And the first one is, only a philosopher would argue that this is not a backpack, whereas the second claim about DACA, or the second claims about DACA, are very controversial and can be debated at great length. So you get a set of claims, but it's not just any set of claims. There has to be like a set of relations. To use an analogy, an argument can be seen as kind of like a family. And a family is not just like any collection of people. You just can't like stick together whole people and say family. You need to have a relationship connecting them together. And in the case of the argument, the thing that ties them together, making them more than just claims stuck together, is this. So you get a set of claims, one of which is supposed to be supported by or derived from the others. To be more particular, every argument consists of one or more premises, which are evidence or reasons being offered. Reasons being offered for what? Well, the answer to that is the conclusion. And every argument has one and only one conclusion. This is what is being argued for, what is trying to be proven, what is trying to be established. So, quick recap, argument. A set of claims, one of which, the conclusion, is supposed to follow or be supported by the others, which are the premises. Now, if you're trying to find an argument, like trying to find a poisonous snake in floodwater, too soon? Probably too early. Yeah, poisonous snakes kind of, I'm from Maine. None of our stuff is poisonous in Maine. In Florida, like lots of stuff is poisonous. I'm like, you got poisonous stuff here? I have made a poor life choice. And we have bears and stuff, but you know, bears, they're not poisonous. You can kind of see them. So, if you're trying to find an argument, what you look for is the following stuff. First question to ask is, what's the point? Not in the sense of, oh, what's the point of doing this, but in the sense of, what is this person trying to prove? What are they trying to establish? And the answer to the question, what is the point? If you find a point, that could be a conclusion. Now, a person might have a point, but still not have an argument. For example, I might say, or I might tweet, DACA should be kept, or alternatively, DACA should be discontinued.
What is DACA?
It is...
Dreamers.
Yeah.
Dreamers against children.
Yeah, deferred action of... Yeah, basic idea is that when people come here and they bring their children, they come here illegally, but they bring their children. The idea was that the children should not be sent back because of the actions of their parents. And this was passed as an executive order by President Obama because Congress, to be honest, just wasn't going to do anything. And he reluctantly created an executive order. And now Trump is, since it's an executive order, he can just un-executive it. He's basically throwing the ball back into Congress's court. So yeah, so I could make the point that DACA should be kept. Or I could alternatively claim DACA should be, removed. And that would be a point. But if I just say that, if I just tweet that, angrily, DACA should be kept, or DACA should be repealed, I got a point but no argument. So what do I need to add to it to have an argument? Well, the answer is this. I have to give reasons or evidence to support it. They could be bad reasons, could be stupid reasons, could be untrue reasons, but I have to offer at least some evidence or reasons to support that claim. So the conclusion answers the question, what's the point? And so if you find a point, potential argument. But then you got to ask, what are the evidence or reasons, if any of it are being offered? If there's a point but no reasons offered or no evidence, no argument. If there's no point, no argument. So you'd ask first, what is the point? Then you'd go and ask, what are the reasons or evidence? If you don't have a point and you don't have reasons or evidence, no argument. So for example, if I was arguing to keep DACA, I could say that, well, one reason might be we need a consistent policy. If we have people here and say, hey, sure, you can stay, and then suddenly say, hey, we're kicking you out, that could be seen as sort of unfair. It'd be like being invited to live with someone, and suddenly, for no apparent reason, they just say, I'm kicking you out on the street, which could be seen as unfair. Or you could argue the other way. You could say just like, well, going with the analogy of inviting someone to live with you, if it's your house and you just get tired of them, you have every right to boot them out on the street, unless you've got a contract or rent. So you could argue it either way. So generically, argument is a set of claims, one of which is the point, the conclusion, which is found by asking, what's the point? The other ones are the premises, of which there are one or more, and they're found by asking the question, what is the reasons or evidence being offered? Before pressing on, anything about this that needs more stuff? Okay. Now there are three basic flavors of arguments. 2 good flavors, 1 bad flavor. Inductive arguments are defined by how the premises connect to the conclusion. Now if you take a class in another field, they'll probably give you different definitions of induction and reduction. And those definitions are wrong. Well, at least from the standpoint of philosophy. And we own arguments, so we get to say. So inductive arguments deal in probability. So the hallmark of induction is this. An inductive argument is such that the premises provide some degree of support for the conclusion, but less than total. They deal in probability. So even if you have all true premises in an inductive argument, your conclusion could still be wrong. I don't see why, in just a bit. Example of a simple inductive argument. Well, like take for example, like one I used last time. If the iPhone was like 8 coming out now, and if you've had an iPhone before, you may decide, oh, well, I'm going to get the new one because I like my previous one. Now, is it guaranteed that the iPhone 8 will be good? No, it could be terrible. It could be like, the headline could be Apple's iPhone, worst iPhone ever. You know, explodes or draws poisonous snakes to it or something. Some design flaw. Has like the snake app. It's like, bad idea, Apple. Deductive arguments deal in supposedly in certainty. A deductive argument, if it could talk, which would be kind of scary and freaky, but if it could talk, it would say, hi there, I'm a deductive argument. What I promise you is this. If my premises are true, I promise that my conclusion will also be true. And if the deductive argument is doing what it's supposed to, if you give it truth, it gives you truth back guaranteed. So arguments come in those two basic flavors. Inductive arguments deal in likelihood and probability. Deductive arguments deal in certainty. Now, an excellent question might be, given that this deals in certainty, why would anybody ever use inductive arguments? To use an analogy, imagine there are two ride sharing services, and one gives a guarantee. You call them, they guarantee the driver will be there, they guarantee you'll get to the destination. The other one says, our driver will probably show up, and they'll probably get you where you're going. So do you call the first one reliable, we'll call that one reliable drivers, or do you call the second one mostly reliable drivers? Which one do you call? Yeah, why? Yeah, they'll show up. And so inductive arguments are only mostly reliable at best. So why would you ever call them? Well, continuing with the metaphor, suppose you call, reliable drivers. And they say, yeah, we 100% guarantee. But of course, we're booked up until 2025. So in that case, what do?
You call them mostly reliable.
Yeah, you call the mostly reliable because they're available. So the reason why we use inductive arguments is because sometimes it's the only option, the only game in town. Ideally, you'd want to use deduction for everything, but it doesn't work for everything. So we kind of use inductive arguments because sometimes it's all we've got. It's kind of like the reason why people eat, say, ramen noodles. You'd rather have something good, really good, but sometimes it's all you've got. If you want to think about grad school, ramen, good stuff. That's so salty. Now, the fallacy is a bad argument. It's a defect in logic. It is an argument in which the premises do not adequately support the conclusion. You can have inductive fallacies, you can have deductive fallacies, but what they all have in common is the logic is bad. Which takes us to determining badness. Now, when you're building an argument, or looking at somebody else's argument, you'll want to assess them, to know whether it is good, bad, or ugly. So how do you tell? Well, there are two main things to consider. Every argument is built out of parts, and so there are two questions to ask. Is it built well, and are the parts any good? And I'll illustrate this with a couple metaphors. First metaphor, food. When it comes to like a meal, there are basically two main things that can go right or wrong, generally speaking. One is the quality of the cooking. How well is it combined, prepared, etc. And if someone's really bad at cooking, they can do a lot of damage to the food. If someone is really skilled at cooking and putting it well, they can do a very good job. So the first question is, how well is it cooked? But of course, there's also a second question, which is not just how good is the cooking, but how good are the ingredients? Because there's the question of, are the ingredients any good or not? So you could have something that is, you could have a person who's an exceptional cook, preparing things very well, but they could have very bad stuff to work with. You could have the greatest cook in the world, but if all they have is a piece of gum, some dirt, and say slug, they're not going to be able to do much with it. They'll put together the greatest combination possible of dirt, slug, and gum, but it's probably not going to be too spectacular. Or you could have someone who is a terrible cook with the greatest ingredients. They give them the finest vegetables, the finest cuts of meat, and they could just turn it into a tasteless charcoal flaming mess. Another analogy is with, say, painting. There's the quality of the skill of the person assembling the work of art, how well it's put together. And there's also the question of the quality of the materials. But again, these are separate. You could have something put together incredibly skillfully that uses very bad materials. Imagine you give like a great artist a stick and some mud and a wall. Well, they could do something, put together something, very well, but it's still just stick and mud. You could give a person who's not very skilled in art the finest paints, the greatest canvas, the finest brushes, and they would just, paint a horrible stick figure. True, the canvas is great, the brush is great, everything is great, except the way it's all put together. And arguments are the same way. So there's the question of how well is it put together, like the cooking of a meal or the painting of a painting, and there's the question of the quality of the content, like the ingredients of a meal or like the material from which the art is made. So in regards to the first question, it is this. Do the premises logically support the conclusion? If it's a deductive argument, that involves determining whether it's valid or invalid. And we'll see more about that in just a moment. Now, when testing that, if you've had the logic class of critical thinking, this can involve Venn diagrams, truth tables, proofs, none of which we'll look at in this class, because that would take like a whole semester. So there's a set of objective means of telling if an argument is valid or invalid, good or bad. With inductive arguments, they're either strong or weak in varying degrees. When it comes to assessing them, unfortunately, there's no perfectly objective test, like a diagram or table. To use an analogy, assessing deductive arguments is like assessing math problems. There's an objective, yes, it's right, or no, it's wrong, and you can test it, very objectively. Judging inductive arguments is more analogous to judging, say, Olympic figure skating or Olympic, diving. There are certain rules and standards. I think in diving, if you hit like the rocks, then you lose points or something.
Oh my God.
Probably happens. Probably horrible. But there is a degree of subjectivity. So one judge may see it as better or worse than another, despite there being standards. And with inductive arguments, every inductive argument has its own set of standards. So it's like every inductive argument is kind of like its own sport, to use the analogy. So the first question is the reasoning good? If it's deductive, is it valid or invalid? If it's inductive, is it strong or weak? And we'll see more about these concepts in but a moment. The second question is this. Are the premises true, or at least plausible? Well, how do you tell? Well, when assessing premises, it's all about the content. And the best way to be able to assess the content is to be an expert in the field. So if it's an argument about chemistry, ideally you'd want to have an expert chemist assess it. If it's an argument about immigration, you want to have an expert in immigration. But what are some general standards we can use to tell whether a premise is plausible? Well, fortunately, there are three general standards that you can use on anything. First one, does, almost forgot the rule, most important thing in the world. The first question is, does the claim in the premise, does it conflict with your own observations? Does it match what you've seen, heard, or otherwise experienced? If the answer is no, plus in its favor. If the answer is yes, it does conflict, it matches, it goes against what you've seen, heard, etc., then that would be a minus. Now, the fact that something matches your observations or goes against your observations is not completely decisive. Oh, you just by your name or just push that button. Or if you're new, then just push it in the bottom. And I'll print up a newer one once the add drop madness is over. It's over? Oh. Didn't feel like it was over. Still feel some madness. That could just be kind of what I had for breakfast or something. The madness. Turn it that madness cereal. Yeah, so if something goes against your observations or matches them, it doesn't guarantee that it's true or false. Why? Well, our own observations could be mistaken. We may missee something. Or it may be the case that there's some other factor involved. So the takeaway there is basically this. First, if it's something you can observe or have observed, you check to see does it match your observations. If the answer is no, minus. If the answer matches, plus. But again, since our observations could be mistaken, it's not conclusive. Something could go against your observations and still be correct. Something could match your observations and still be false. How could that be possible? Well, in a critical thinking class, we go through that in great detail, but as a quick example. Our perceptions, of course, can be affected by biases, prejudices, and by things like optical illusions. For example, many years ago, I was out doing some repeat miles on the Godby track. And as I was rounding the corner really early in the morning, I saw a UFO, for real, totally real UFO. Because all a UFO is an unidentified flying object, and it was flying, and I could not identify it. But it looked like one of the classic UFOs, which is a triangle with light on all the tips of the triangle, light in the center. And I was like, holy crap, the aliens are here. But I noticed that no one else on the track was panicking. So I thought maybe they don't see it, or maybe I'm not seeing UFOs, so I'll wait a little bit before screaming, aliens, aliens are here. And so as I went around the corner, I suddenly realized it wasn't a UFO anymore, it was the blimp heading to the FSU football game. It was just a really weird angle that it looked like a flying triangle. Unless, of course, they noticed that I'd recognized them and quickly switched on their alien camouflage. That's right, aliens. I'm on to you. And so there'd be a case where my perceptions were off. So my observation was UFO. But of course, that was the optical illusion created by the angle, the new angle. Or was it? Now the second thing to ask is, does the premise match my background information? Your background information is all the stuff you learned and believed and acquired over the years. And it's called background because you may not be able to say exactly where it came from. For example, when you're thirsty, do you drink a cool, refreshing glass of liquid Drano? No, because you know that would be bad. You may not know exactly when you learned that, but you know that's a bad idea. So our background information is all the stuff that's, we picked up over the years. And so if something goes against that, it's a minus against it. If something is consistent with it, it's a plus in its favor. But of course, we need to consider that our background information can, of course, be incorrect or flawed. I believe lots of things that are not true. I know this because as I've gone through life, I find out, like, wow, I believe that totally wasn't true. I don't know which things I believe are untrue, because if I knew they were untrue, I wouldn't believe them anymore, but I know I've got a lot of stuff up there that's not true. So because of that, if something matches your background information, it's a plus in its favor, but not decisive. Simply if it goes against your background information, it's not, it's a strike against it, but not decisive. Because your background information could be wrong. In some cases, it's pretty easy. For example, if a premise claims that penguins are native to Florida, you would say, well, no, not like now. Maybe way in the past, perhaps, because for the most part, penguins live in cold areas. And of course, with your own observations, you've probably not seen penguins roaming around in the wild here. And what you know about penguins tells you, they don't live here. Now, in other cases, though, especially things that are controversial, political, etc., people get a very different background information. For example, take the view of immigration. Some people's background information tells them that people who immigrate here steal American jobs, so immigrants are bad. Other people, their background information says that immigrants create jobs and contribute to the economy, and are essential to the American economic success. And so, depending on different people you ask, they have different background information about immigrants. I mean, somebody's got it right, and somebody's got it wrong, or maybe they're all wrong. But you would have disputes about that. So the takeaway from that is that a background information is a good check. It's basically our plausibility checker, but not guaranteed. Just because something seems plausible doesn't mean it's true. And just because something seems implausible, it doesn't mean it's false. Which takes us to our third standard, which is this. Does the claim in the premise, does it match up with established credible claims and credible sources? If the answer is yes, plus. If the answer is no, minus. Now, in some cases, this can be pretty straightforward. For example, if we had an argument about the tropical storm, the hurricane coming here, what's a credible source for checking claims about a hurricane?
Weather Channel.
Yeah, Weather Channel. In FSU's, storm, we have the hurricane, center in the U.S. here. Doesn't mean they'll always be right, but they're a good source. So it matches what they say, it's probably true. It goes against it, probably not true. Now, but when it comes to things that are controversial, then of course you end up with a real problem, because what people think of as a credible source can vary quite a bit. For example, our president, Donald Trump, has one set of things he considers credible sources. Fox News, Breitbart, etc. Other people have a different set of credible sources. So there is the practical problem of how do you tell what source is credible? And most people go by, if I like it, it's credible. And if I don't like it, it's not. Which is a horrible standard for picking credibility. Now, the way you actually test this, we'll see not today but soon, is what's called an argument from authority. How do you tell? Actually, we don't cover this in this class, but sorry, I'm misleading you here. The argument from authority basically is how you tell if someone is a credible source. And it includes things such as their expertise, their bias, etc. So, when you get a premise and you wonder, is it plausible? Those are the tests. Does it match my own observations? Does it match my background information? Does it match credible sources? And again, there's a very practical problem of knowing what is a credible source, especially in this time of, fake news and deceit.
Right.
Now, what if you actually get good logic and actually have true premises? Well, then you get some special terms for that. You get, sorry, this would be sound. That is not a word. Oh, I'm just making up words today. There we go. So sound, the term sound, and we'll see this in a bit, means that it's valid, plus it actually does have all true premises. With inductive arguments, if they get all true premises and the reasoning is strong, they're called cogent. And so ideally what you want to aim for when you're trying to build arguments, you ideally want to build, if it's deductive, a sound argument. Perfect logic, true premises. With an inductive argument, you want to make it cogent, as strong as possible logically, plus true premises. And so those would be the platinum and silver standards for arguments. Before pressing on, anything about these two questions that needs more stuff? Okay. So looking at someone else's argument, you ask those two questions. Is the reasoning good? Is the content plausible? When building your own, you ask the same question. Is my logic good? Are my premises plausible? To the degree the answer is yes to both questions, the arguments are good. To the degree the argument is no to both questions, the arguments are bad. Now we'll take a brief look at deductive arguments. As I mentioned before, deductive arguments, their hallmark is this. Deductive arguments are supposed to give us certainty. And they do this because they're doing what they're supposed to. The conclusion doesn't leap beyond or take us beyond the premises. Essentially, kind of roughly put, we're sort of like deducing, literally, or analyzing from what we've got and drawing that conclusion entirely from what's there. There is no leap. There's no gap, metaphorically speaking, between the evidence and the conclusion. So the definition is this. A deductive argument is an argument that is supposed to be such that if all the premises were true, the conclusion must be true. So what are they used for? Well, the main use, of course, as you might imagine, is cases in which you need certainty. Because a deductive argument that's doing what it's supposed to gives you certainty. But again, going back to the question, why not always use these? Why is there even inductive logic? Well, the answer is, if you look at deductive arguments, they're great for what they do, but there's lots and lots of stuff they can't do. To illustrate, it'd be great if we had a deductive argument about the hurricane. If it's a valid argument, we put in true premises, we would know exactly where the hurricane is going. But do we know where it's going? No, we're engaged in inductive reasoning. Essentially what we're doing is, they're saying, when they have the rejected course maps, it's a good example of inductive logic, in the real world. They're basically saying, based on what we've seen with other hurricanes, this is where it'll probably go. So if you say it's going to go here, that's the conclusion to an inductive argument. All the data going in could be true, but the conclusion could be mistaken, because you're making a leap from what you know to what you don't. And unfortunately, you can't use a deductive argument to predict hurricanes, at least not yet. So again, the reason why we use inductive arguments is because in the case of many things, that's the only option. There is no deductive argument that tells us where the hurricane is going to be. That would actually work. How do we tell if they're good or bad or not? Well, as I mentioned, they're, for categorical logic, there are Venn diagrams. For truth functional logic, there's truth tables and proofs. And again, none of which we'll get into, because that would take a whole semester, and this is metaphysics, not logic. Now, we will go over four concepts. First one is valid. Now, valid is really short definition, but often creates lots of confusion. And here's the definition. A valid argument is such that if all the premises were true, then the conclusion must be true. The invalid argument is this, similar but different. An invalid argument is such that even if all the premises were true, the conclusion could still be false. Now, couple mistakes people often make is this. In the case of a valid argument, people often think that valid means true. And that if there's, false premises in a valid argument, well, it can't be valid. And people often think that invalid means false. But not the case. Validity and invalidity tell you nothing about, tell you very little about what's true or not in an argument. To illustrate. One of the classic deductive arguments is modus ponens.
Modus ponens?
Yep, mode of affirming. Latin. If P, then this little symbol means if then, so it's if P, then Q, P, therefore Q. It's known in English, its English name is affirming the antecedent, because this is the antecedent slot, and this is the consequence slot. Just like, to use a metaphor, just like in baseball. If you're on the pitcher's mound and you're supposed to be there, then you are the pitcher, because you're on the mound. Likewise, whatever is here is going to be the antecedent, just because that's what the position is called. Or like in football. If you're standing in the quarterback position and you're supposed to be there, you're the quarterback. Now this argument is valid. And valid means if all the premises were true, the conclusion must be true. And if you look at it, that does make sense. It does make sense because if P gives you Q and you got P, you got to have Q. For example, if today is Wednesday, then tomorrow is Thursday. True. Today is Wednesday. True. So tomorrow is Thursday. Guaranteed. Now, the reason why valid doesn't mean true, though, can be shown by a couple of illustrations. I'll do one silly one and one less silly one. First one that's silly. If Drogon is a dragon, Drogon breathes fire. Drogon is a dragon, so it breathes fire. The problem is, of course, there are no dragons. So is the logic good? The logic's perfect. Because if something is a dragon, if it's true that dragons breathe fire, and it's true this is a dragon, then it's got to breathe fire. The problem is, of course, there are no dragons. Now, that, of course, is a silly example, which is why you think, well, there are no dragons, so the logic is bad. But no, the logic's great. The problem lies in the truth of the premise. There's a false premise.
So, in what context are we checking to see if the dragons exist?
Oh.
Is it like realistically, or?
Yeah, because the question would be, the first question is the logic good? And that's a question of the logic. The second question is, are these claims true? Now, regardless of the first one, the logic is perfect. If P gives you Q and you got P, you got to have Q. So if dragons existed and breathed fire, and Drogon was a dragon, he would be a fire breather. It just so happens that this claim is false. This one may be false, because we don't have any dragons to tell whether they're fire breathing or not. But we know for sure this one, at least this one, is false. So logic is good, but the content is bad. Now that one, of course, is in a way sort of, the reason why I use the silly one is because it's natural to think, well, that's silly, that's not logical. But actually it is logical, it's just untrue. Good logic, bad content. Now, to use a non-silly example that illustrates the same thing is this. If today is Monday, then tomorrow is Tuesday. Today is Monday, tomorrow's Tuesday. Good logic? Yeah, logic is perfect. But today's not Monday, it's Wednesday. So the logic is always good, because it's a valid argument, but the content may be false. You can put untrue things into good reasoning.
So how would we know if it's true then?
That's a good question. Because when it comes to the question, is logic good, with deductive arguments, you can do truth tables and diagrams, etc. And these are tested. With a content, you'd have to check it by those three methods. Have you ever seen a dragon? What does your background information tell you about dragons? What do credible sources say about dragons? And so we would believe that this, even though the logic is good, that this premise is not true.
So in that kind of, like, using that kind of as an example, like, can you say that how, like, in the Chinese zodiac, that every other animal that they have in the zodiac is real, so then they have a dragon on the zodiac also, so I should conclude that the dragon is real also.
I mean, you could make, that would be a different kind of argument. You could make an inductive argument, which is that, the zodiac has all these real animals, the dragon's in there, so inductively the dragon should be real. In that case, you would be addressing this argument, but creating a new one, trying to establish the truth of the premise.
Oh, that's your content.
Yeah, whether the dragons exist or not. Yeah, the argument itself is just assessed, whether the argument is good logic or not, that depends on the argument. Whether the premises are true or not depends on the quality of what goes in there.
Mm-hmm.
To use another metaphor or example, think about, I'll use two. One is like a hypothetical. If the hurricane hits Tallahassee, then there'll be a lot of damage. The hurricane hits Tallahassee, there'll be damage. Now, is that good logic?
Yes.
Yeah, but do we know if this is true or not? We don't. So our reasoning is good, even though we have no idea whether it's going to hit Tallahassee or not at this point. And so we can reason well about things that aren't true. We can reason well about things that we don't know if they're true or not. So when they make those projected course, like if you look at the maps, they're basically saying, if it goes this way, if this happens, then this happens. So this happened, this will happen. But of course, those are all, the reasoning is all good, but the question is this actually true? Now with metaphor, think about like an Excel spreadsheet. And imagine you have a class, you have to create an Excel spreadsheet to do calculations. Now if you do your formulas correctly, that means if you put in the right numbers, you'll get the right result. Like suppose you have to build a spreadsheet to calculate a mortgage. Well, if you do your spreadsheet right, then if you put in the right numbers for the the cost of the house, the mortgage, interest rate, you get a right answer. But of course, when you make a spreadsheet if you're taking a class on accounting and you're learning about mortgages, do you actually have to buy a house to do the math? No, because that'd be a really expensive class. Yeah, you can do all the mortgage calculations just made up. You're reasoning about stuff that's not true. Here's if you get an assignment, imagine there's a mortgage, a $500,000 mortgage on a house with 3.2% interest. If the owner pays it off in 10 years, what do they owe in interest? It's all hypothetical. There is no house, there is no owner, there is none of that. But you can still do the math correctly.
I just wanted to ask about some more content. How did this go from, I remember seeing this in math, so how did it go from math, and why is it that they use it in philosophy?
Oh, math or logic?
I didn't take logic.
Oh.
I'm not sure.
Oh, we asking why they use math in philosophy?
Yeah, how did that transpire, like, I guess, in logic then?
Oh, the reason why they use, depending on who you talk to, people like Descartes, for example, who developed mathematics, philosopher. And so one reason why philosophers use math is because they kind of invented math. People like Euclid, Pythagoras, and so all the people who gave us math were philosophers. Also because from the standpoint of philosophy, math is just a form of deductive logic.
Mm-hmm.
You have deductive logic, and in there is math, and so it becomes part of philosophy in that regard. Now, there's different types of math. So, like for example, typically in philosophy, you won't do like stats, although it's part of critical thinking. and you won't calculate mortgage rates, but the stuff you're doing is still part, the mathematics is still part of philosophy. It's based on philosophical assumptions about numbers and how math works. And so I guess the reason why it's in philosophy is because philosophers invented math. Although people may say, no, Descartes is not a philosopher, he's
So
a mathematician.
philosophy came first, before math, you'd say?
Oh, good question. Probably did, in the sense that people were probably thinking about stuff and probably thought, how can we organize things? And
Yeah.
somebody came up with the idea of, probably like with sticks and rocks or fingers and said, numbers. Okay, so next time we'll pick up with more stuff about arguments, assuming that we're still here Friday. And so everybody stay safe, and I'll see you Friday or, no, depending on how things go.
I have a question. It's about